This is King World News. I'm Eric King, and you're about to hear an extremely powerful interview with Jim Rogers, who discusses government corruption, governments using two sets of books, a possible timetable for a collapse in the United States, and eventual civil unrest in the U.S. as well. Remember to go to our homepage at www.kingworldnews.com for more interviews, where this week we have an information-packed interview with Jim Rickards of Omnis, Inc., where he discusses the gold market, central bank purchases of gold, the looming conflict between Israel and Iran, and more. We also have hedge fund manager Bill Lagner from Bearing Asset Management, who goes after corruption among various banking syndicates. Joining us now from Asia is legendary investor Jim Rogers. Jim, I have so many questions, so I'm just going to jump right in here. What is happening in India? Are the government politicians lining their pockets over there?
Over where? Government politicians are lining their pockets everywhere.
Is that a problem in India that you've been talking about recently, where they're not really committing the infrastructure? When you go out into the countryside, they're just kind of lining their own pockets?
Well, I have not seen any corruption firsthand, but the world is full of stories about Indian politicians and the corruption therein. We do know that there are a lot of rich Indian politicians, and a lot of their cronies are very rich, so I have to presume that India, like everywhere else, people are on the take. I do know that India's infrastructure is pretty hopeless. They have, so apparently it started building more, spending more attention to infrastructure, but if you drive around India, it's appalling how bad it is compared to even China, where China's got some of the best highways in the world now. India's still struggling for whatever reason.
Let's talk about China. I know you are bullish long-term. You've always said that. It's been a great call. You were in very early. But are the Chinese facing short-term problems? And can you elaborate on that, Jim?
Well, everybody's facing short-term problems. You've got the two largest economies in the world, the U.S. and Europe, in trouble. And apparently not recovering very strongly yet. Whenever that happens, it's going to affect people. The Chinese economy is 1/10 the size of America and the EU combined, or not even the EU, just the Euro part of the EU. Yes, whenever you have people that are that significant in trouble, it affects everybody. Some parts of the Chinese economy are actually perhaps in a bubble. I worry about real estate in the coastal cities, in places like Hong Kong and Shanghai. Very much I worry about them, because they just seem to be absurdly priced. However, other parts of the Chinese economy are doing fine. The world's got problems, and when you are only 1/10 the size of the rest of the world, not even the rest of the world, just Europe and Asia, Europe and America, they too are suffering in some ways. And China has put out too much credit the past year or so. A lot of it has gone into real estate speculation, and I think that's going to be a problem. But remember, real estate speculation in China is a very, very small part of the economy. It's not like some other countries.
I want to move on to Greece. We've got some of these problems happening inside the Euro in Italy and these other places, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. But Goldman Sachs, obviously getting some very bad press over there for their activities with the Greeks involving the swaps and whatnot. If Italy and Greece are running two sets of books, is that the case that a lot of these countries have tremendous problems with their balance sheets and they're just not disclosing them, Jim?
Well, absolutely. It's not as though Goldman Sachs invented all this. The Greeks and the Italians and many people have been using phony bookkeeping for a long time. France, Greece, Italy, many of the countries have been using phony accounting. Under the Maastricht Treaty, they had to meet certain economic guidelines. When they started failing to meet those guidelines in the mid-'90s, they all started using phony accounting. And, we all know that once you make one small transgression, it's easy to make another one and another one and another one. And the next thing you know, you made a lot of serious mistakes. And then, it was then that things like swaps and some of the other things came into play, just like in Enron. Enron was a perfectly sound and stable company, and then eventually they started using a lot of tricks, and the next thing you knew, the whole thing fell apart. Well, that's more or less what has happened with some of the European countries. Goldman Sachs didn't institute this. If Greek politicians hadn't been lying about their own books and spending money they didn't have, there would have been no need for any of this. It's a little bit hard for me to blame Goldman Sachs politicians in Greece who've been lying and stealing for decades.
I don't disagree with anything you just said there. I'm just looking a little bit now at the bank's roles in some of this. And you're right. You're right about the corruption inside the government and the overspending and the lack of fiscal discipline and the double books and all the lies. But when you look at the banks specifically, how can they, being fully aware of a country's situation, get involved in creating swaps, enabling them and their friends to bet against those countries and profit from their demise when things go wrong?
I don't know that Goldman Sachs was, in fact, playing both sides against the middle. It may well be. We know that financial types have done that throughout history, since the beginning of time. If so, and if it's not disclosed, then obviously there are questions which have to be raised and answered.
Understood. We also know Dubai has off-balance sheet liabilities. That goes back to last Thanksgiving. How far and wide does this net go, Jim? Are governments, just like their respective banks, are they running two sets of books also when you look at a lot of the governments around the world, if you had to guess?
Most governments are. That's the way governments are. Look at the United States.
Yeah.
Look at New York State. Look at any place you want to look. Look at California. Most companies, or many companies, not most, run two sets of books. So it's very common. I mean, some countries don't. I mean, there's not much reason for Ethiopia to run two sets of books. But some certainly are and have, and these days it's easier and easier with some of the financial instruments that are available. But always, at least in my experience, it's needed to be very careful about investing in anything. And read everything you can and triple and double check everything you can, because what you're presented is probably not going to be accurate unless you make very sure it is. But this is the way the world has always been. I don't want to suddenly start saying, well, let's look at the problems that have suddenly arisen in 2010. You can look back any period in American history. Let's use America, because we say we're the best. You know, throughout this, went to Wall Street in the 1960s. Throughout my Wall Street career, there have been many cases of phony accounting, double sets of books, etc., both at the government level and at the corporate level. So this is the way the world has always worked, and people have to understand that and do their homework to be prepared.
So, Jim, since it's always been that way, I mean, eventually you hit a wall. Eventually you're going to have your currency collapse, or something's going to have to change. You can't just run two sets of books and QE into infinity without any type of problems. As we slowly peel back the layers of this onion, these governments around the world who are running two sets of books, how are the citizens of these countries going to feel when things collapse, when some of the countries collapse, if they do, assuming they do? Like the citizens feel like they've been Madoffed. How do you think they're going to react to that?
The way they always have. They're going to be furious, justifiably furious. Look at what's happened in California. People are very unhappy. Look at Massachusetts even. You know, they threw out some of the scoundrels who've been responsible for it. Virginia, New Jersey. And people are unhappy. And if things really start getting bad, people get more and more unhappy. And ultimately, we've already started having social unrest in some countries. Ultimately, throughout history, people find out they've been misled, and it leads to declining standard of living and even hardship. There's more social unrest. And again, this is nothing radical. This is the way the world has always worked and is working again.
Let me ask you, Jim, where are you investing right now?
I'm not doing anything right now. I'm watching. My most recent investments over the past few months would be, more U.S. dollars. I guess that's about the only thing I've done in the last several weeks. I'm mainly watching. My main investments are commodity-oriented and currency-oriented. I've started putting out a few shorts, very few, in the U.S. Stock markets around the world went up a whole lot, so I don't see any urgent reasons to buy any places. Commodities are up. Commodities are a better place to be, in my view, in the future than stocks. And I own a fair number of commodities, which I bought over the past decade or so, but some in the last year or so, and currency. So I guess the answer to your question is a few shorts in the U.S. stock market, a few more currencies, and commodities would have been the most recent purchase, but that was a few months ago when I bought the last commodities too.
Without mentioning any names, because I'm sure you don't want to do that, Jim, what are you looking to short on the U.S. side? Is there a specific sector or sectors you're looking at?
No, and the reason I say that is because I don't see any great excesses. Now, there may be, just that, I'm too lazy or too distracted to really look that closely, but I don't see any huge excesses in the American financial system. A few years ago, obviously Fannie Mae was a sham. The investment banks were an excess. Citibank was an excess and a sham. These days, there are stocks that are up, but that's different from being a bubble or being a mania. Stocks can go down, they can go up, and they always have and always will. But I don't know